Hello and welcome to the very first HealthTech Hour on UK Health Radio. My name is Steve Roest, and every week we'll be bringing you the best guests and interviews with the people shaping the health technology landscape in the UK and beyond. I'm a CEO and founder in the health tech space. I have nearly 20 years of experience in scaling venture-backed companies across the world, and I am passionate about the people and companies who are changing the world. To keep up with who we're talking to on the show, make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at HealthTech Hour, and make sure you definitely follow UK Health Radio, which is at UK Health Radio. As an introduction to my first guest, my current company where I'm CEO, Vital Sign Solutions, has developed the digital platform PocDoc, which allows anyone with a smartphone to give themselves a blood test, get the results, get an assessment for a range of major diseases, all within minutes of taking the test. Our first tests are focused on cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, but we have designed the platform to be able to digitize any rapid test, which means that we can use PocDoc to scale mass rapid testing for major diseases anywhere in the world. And this brings me nicely onto my first guest, my first ever guest actually on the HealthTech Hour, which is the incredible unstoppable force that is Brigette, CEO and founder of BioSure. Now, BioSure are a world-leading health tech company. They are UK soup to nuts, as they say, and they are at the cutting edge of developing diagnostic tests that allow people to self-test for major diseases. Now, we can come on to exactly what they're doing, but BioSure are the world's first developer of an HIV self-test, and they will be the world's first developer of a COVID-19 self-test, both antibody and antigen. And that will really be a game changer. At PocDoc, we've been lucky enough to work with Brigette and her team for quite a few months now, helping scale COVID-19 rapid testing, and it's been an absolute pleasure and quite a huge success. Brigette is one of the most inspiring people that I know, and also, more importantly, as a guest on a live radio show, is never shy of an opinion or two. So, Brigette, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, Steve. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm absolutely honoured to be your first guest. Thank you.
I know. First guest. So how are the current restrictions kind of dealing with you? Are you guys are still working, still at it? What's happening?
Yeah, I mean, our facilities here, obviously we're in tier 4 as are most of the workforce. So we're running on a skeleton team here now. I think everyone's Christmas, we're amongst the millions of us whose Christmas has been thrown into disarray. But yeah, I think you just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other, haven't we, at the moment?
Just keep cracking on. So yeah. This is the first show, so I'm going to try and stick to the format of the show as best as possible, seeing as it's the first show. So that's 3 parts. So the first part is kind of an origins. So how did you get to where you are? The second part is really around all of the world-changing things that BioSure are doing right now. And then the third part is what the future holds for BioSure. And then also we try and kick around a few topics of the day. Now, I think it's going to be hard to avoid COVID, but we'll do our best. There's definitely a couple of other things that I've got to throw in the mix, but yes. So yeah, well, let's get going, shall we? So how did you get started in the world of work? Because I know that you didn't wake up one day and just start BioSure. So where did you get your kind of start?
No, I mean, my former businesses were all kind of involved in fast-moving consumer goods. So I've got a healthy experience in retail goods, in marketing, in branding, bringing new products to market. But really, BioSure was founded on the delivery mechanism that we use for our HIV self-test. We didn't actually invent that. That was invented by somebody I know who's incredibly clever. For me, in my naivety, understanding self-testing in the principles of pregnancy testing, but looking for diseases, it was just a no-brainer when the opportunity came for us to take a licensing right on the barrel delivery. Yeah, self-testing, why wouldn't you? And I have to say the journey has been far from straightforward, but I've learned a lot, and I'm privileged, yeah, to have had this journey to date.
So, like, before you got into BioSure and healthcare and that kind of thing, what was your view of healthcare and health tech? Was it something that you had thought about before, or was it just really opportunistic through the person that you knew and it sort of kind of came together? What?
I think it was quite opportunistic. Obviously, as a consumer, everything I talk about with pregnancy testing, I always try and bring back. With self-testing, I try and bring back to pregnancy testing because everybody understands the principle behind that. So, as a consumer, as a user, yes, I had a vested interest. The realms of regulations and how difficult this arena is to be in I was completely naive of that fact. So that was probably
Yeah,
a good
I think
thing.
that we can swap some more stories about that one for sure.
Yeah.
But let me just see if I can kind of understand it. So the person comes to you sort of out the blue, saying, I've come up with a way to self-test. Now, at this time, was self-testing even a thing at all, or what was it? Like, what was the kind of the landscape like?
Certainly not with HIV self-testing. So there had been a global moratorium on self-testing for HIV since the early 90s for very obvious reasons. But as the technology matured and as treatments became available, self-testing for HIV kind of emerged onto the landscape. So in 2012, the US was the first country to allow self-testing for HIV. So the mantle was kind of picked up in the UK, and we were part of the initial kind of lobbying groups. So eventually in 2014, the law was changed and self-tests for HIV were allowed to be marketed or approved, marketed and sold. So we were kind of on our way at that point.
Okay. And back in the 90s, were there actually self-tests available, but they weren't very accurate, therefore the moratorium, or what sort of happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was potentially sort of a black market, but certainly no approved tests at the time. Everything was obviously lab-based, and lateral flow technology, which is the type of technology that we and many others use, was in its infancy, really based, primarily it was developed for pregnancy testing. So.
Okay. And so, but someone coming to you with a barrel, which is the kind of I guess the outside of the device, is still kind of a long way from actually where you ended up by launching it. So I mean, that's a big step, right? Because really the barrel is just a sort of a plastic tube. It's a lovely plastic tube, don't get me wrong. But why did you start with HIV? Where did that come from?
Well, again, partly naivety. So I have to say the plastic tube is really a bit more than that. It's just genius in its sort of proprietary technology of how simple it is to use. But through my journey of starting BioSure and traveling around the world, which I did up until beginning of March this year, we started working, and I was engaged with lots of lateral flow device manufacturers all around the world, and we took some distribution rights and we started working with the NHS, and then we kind of specialized in sexual health because that was a real area of interest and of growth. So through working with the NHS and working with trusts all across the country is really how we found our feet very firmly in the HIV space.
Okay. And how much more complicated is it to test for HIV than for other sexual health issues or diseases?
Well, I mean, HIV testing is very mature now. I think all types of sexual health tests, all have their variations for how they perform. I mean, our real kind of unique point, and one of the difficulties, is that the sample size we work with is only 2.5 microliters. Wow. So it's an incredibly small sample size.
We're obviously in this space with PocDoc, so I kind of understand what that means, and I'm sure lots of people listening understand what that means. But is there a way for you to kind of quantify that for people that might not understand how small 2.5 microliters actually is?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very small sample. So for our HIV self-test, we use a pediatric gauge lancet. So it's a very fine gauge, a shallow kind of slash to the skin.
Right.
And when you form a very small drop of blood, that's about 5 microliters. So it's half a small drop of blood. Yeah, that's which incredible. Just sits on your fingertip. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And so was there an appetite at the time from healthcare organizations, from the government, from regulators to see an HIV self-test, or was this something that was not welcomed, or how did you start to navigate that?
With great difficulty. So I have a genius clinical and regulatory director. So we initially approached the MHRA saying, look, this is what we want to do. How do we do this? And we drew a bit of a blank, really. There was no technical specification. There was no European kind of governance on this. It had been devolved to country level. So we discussed with various notified bodies, eventually settled with BSI, who's the British Standards Institute, and we kind of worked through what the specification would look like, what the protocol would look like, and through performing kind of all of our evaluations in the UK, a lot of which were around usability of the test. So we had to prove that an untrained user, a test naive user, would be able to not only perform their test themselves accurately, but they would also be able to read their result and interpret their result for what that means. So there was risk. I mean, when we came to market in 2015, we were the highest risk device that had ever really come to market, and obviously HIV and blood-based and an untrained user. So we were under masses of scrutiny, but we've I mean, since the outset, been ultra passionate about what we do. So we've gone above and beyond what was required for signposting, for customer support, for our post-market surveillance, capture mechanisms and data. So we've tried to do it with bells on, set the bar very high.
Well, it looks like you have. And what kind of, I mean, did anyone try and sort of really, I guess, obviously the sensitivities around any kind of self-testing are quite high, but irrespective of what you're testing for, because if you get it wrong, then whichever way you get it wrong, whether it's a false positive or false negative, there's risk. And that is what the device regulations, that's what the regulators are trying to exclude. And that's why they make people do all of the technical dossiers and they do all of the usability trials, because it's really about risk. So once you'd done all of that, did you feel like you had enough support from the regulators, or were you like the canary in the coal mine that was trying to kind of get them to sort of get with the self-testing program a bit? Or was there, do you see what I mean? What was the kind of...
No, I understand. And I think certainly the latter of the two. I mean, obviously a regulator's job is to make sure that only from a self-testing perspective, let alone any other test, but something that's highly usable and highly accurate can come onto the market. And there's behavioural risks, as I say, of someone actually interpreting their own result and what that means. But I mean, people have always asked outside of the regulators, well, what happens with false positives? And they must be awful, and someone's at home and they've got a positive HIV result. But the global testing algorithm for HIV is that any positive HIV test is confirmed by a different type of technology. So some countries use 2, some use 3. The real risk is in a false negative. So for a false positive...
So false negative means you get the all clear, but you actually have the disease.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the specificity, how many not getting false negatives. And obviously from an HIV perspective, if somebody got a negative result but actually did have HIV infection, they might never test again. They certainly wouldn't seek treatment. They could unknowingly transmit.
Pass it on.
Yeah. So it's the false negatives for us that was the real risk that we had to mitigate.
Okay. And how does the test perform on the specificity sensitivity, which is the false positive, false negative piece? What's the test?
So from a sensitivity perspective of how many times we wouldn't get a false positive, that's about 2 in 1,000, something around that statistically, but a false negative is less than 1 in 1,000.
Wow. Okay.
So it's highly accurate. To gain for an HIV test, to gain any CE marking, it has to be more than 99.5% accurate. That's the rules. That's
the golden rule. And I think just as some kind of, for people listening to understand that as a benchmark, the government was set for antibody testing. And I think for antigena, I'm not sure for COVID, because obviously now everyone, the concept of rapid testing and lateral flow and things like that has now entered the general parlance of of the society, they sort of set like 97, 98%. So what you're saying is actually for HIV testing, the bar is even higher.
Yes.
For that. Okay. And when did you actually have any kind of, because the idea with self-testing is that you can sell it directly to the consumer, or that the consumer can get it directly themselves, so they can, if they have a concern, if they want to take control of their health. And this is why we founded PocDoc as well, from preventative disease, cardiovascular, type 2 diabetes, but where people would want to try and take more care of themselves, they could go and get a test however they wanted to do it. And so was that something that, like, when you started it, had you thought about how to get the tests out to the people that would want them or need them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was totally novel at the time that we brought our BioSure tests to market. So there was no appetite from government, and not really in healthcare. We have seen that change over our sort of 5 years in the market. So direct to consumer was always going to be our primary route to market. And I mean, we have our own website, so consumers can buy directly from us. We sell on Amazon, we sell in Boots and Superdrug and Lloyd's and all of the key Well Pharmacy, all of the key pharmacy retailers in the UK. But getting that message out in the first place, and then convincing someone to spend their money and test themselves on their own terms, was a feat in itself. And we've invested heavily in masses of education. There's lots of signposting information that goes with the test about what your result means, how treatable HIV is. But we've faced issues, and they're still ongoing with Google, where we have
Google?
Well, I know Google, good old Google. So we are in the same classification as guns and things like that. And
that makes sense. That seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when it was illegal, then fair enough. But that view hasn't changed. It's still their policy, apart from in the USA, I have to say.
Okay.
So we have a fully certified product, but we're not allowed to sell it on shopping. We get blocked all the time, visibility, because it's an HIV test.
But you've had pickup with it. It's in Superdrug. It's in Boots from time to time. And you've expanded in Sub-Saharan Africa as well, which I would imagine is a real. Is the attitude down there different? Because didn't I see somewhere that you actually have vending machines in South Africa?
Yes.
That sell HIV tests through a vending machine?
And we've got some in the UK, so that's been developed with PHE and the NHS and the Martin Fisher Foundation. So putting vending machines into high risk kind of places. So some of them are in sex on premises venues. We've seen uptake in 50% plus of people who've never tested for HIV before, and they're an at-risk population. But whichever markets we're in, so South Africa was our second territory, we have gone to market as a consumer product. Right. Which is fun. It gives you, there's an element where
it gives you more control of your own destiny, but it's hard.
It is, but what it has enabled us to do is build real solid communities, because obviously there's so much stigma around HIV, and we took the stance right from the beginning that we were just never going to discuss it, because as soon as you discuss stigma, it's in the room, and suddenly there's either anxiety, excuse me, or pity or fear, all negative emotions. So we have maintained a really positive, take control, it's in your power, this is a choice for you, to know your own status on your own terms.
But not that I spend a huge amount of time following BioSure on Instagram, but like I know, shocking, sorry. But yeah, you can unfollow me now if you want to. But you can see from reading the comments and the kind of what people are saying about your tests, particularly within the gay community, that this is seen as a very positive thing. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's much controversy from it in that respect. So it seems like, it's certainly been accepted in some areas.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked really hard to overcome that. And when you just think about everybody's kind of pace of life now, and again, coming back to pregnancy testing, if a woman thought she might be pregnant, First of all, you've got to have time off work, assuming you go to work. You've got to get to a healthcare facility, park, wait in the queue, explain why you're there, do your sample, wait 2 or 3 days for a result, and then, you know, have some counselling around it. And it's, you know, people say that pregnancy is nothing like HIV, but it is absolutely life-changing for a woman, whether she wants to be pregnant, whether she doesn't want to be pregnant, the emotions. So it's the same. Everyone's life is very fast. No one has any time to do things even that they meant to do. So the more convenient we can make this, and we always say we're another choice. There are always sexual health clinics. We work closely with most of the NHS sexual health. It's another choice, and it allows people to test themselves frequently on their own terms.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to make sense for me that if someone would want to get tested for something, that they would be able to do that in a way that they would want, and you know, they wouldn't have to go and queue up at a clinic. And actually now, if you know, I've read recently that a lot of the funding's being cut for sexual health clinics, particularly in London and some of the major centres. So it might become more difficult actually to get to see doctors and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the funding has changed, and that lots of places now you can't have an HIV test unless you're within a certain age group or a certain demographic. Yeah.
Wow.
But during lockdown, obviously the clinics have been closed, or certainly in the March lockdown. So lockdown number 1. Yeah. So we've worked with trusts across the country, supplying through the NHS our tests to end users who can't get tested in clinic.
Right, because you could just send them straight to their houses.
Yeah, absolutely. They fit through your letterbox. No one knows what it is. So really straightforward.
So I want to kind of move on slightly now. And I think it would be helpful, because you and I have talked about this a lot, but the difference between, and why there's a difference between self-testing and how that is viewed from governments, regulators, and so on, and like testing in a professional setting. Because obviously that within the discussion now in society, there's a lot of discussion around rapid antigen tests, rapid antibody tests. Can they be done professionally? Can you do them at home? This, that, and the other. So there's sort of a much higher awareness of rapid testing, which is great. You know, it seems like people are much more open to being tested and to accepting testing within what they do on a day-to-day basis. I admit that, like, it might be forced upon people a little bit, but there's still a massive difference. And this will take us, I think, onto what you've been doing in COVID. But just to set the scene, why is there such a difference between self-testing and testing in a professional setting?
Well, I mean, from a regulatory perspective, it is absolutely enormous. It's like chalk and cheese. So when we're looking at COVID testing, for having a CE mark for a professional used COVID test, whether that's antibody or antigen, that goes through a process which is called self-certified. So there's a technical specification that, as a manufacturer, you go against the checklist, so you conform, and you basically self-certify your test for professional use. And the reason for professional use is that professional user should have experience and an understanding of what a test is.
So it basically, you know, it kind of offloads a huge amount of the risk onto the healthcare professional.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, reading the result is performing the test and reading the result are two separate things. So certainly in the world of COVID, where there's can be a huge variance in the strength of the result, then you need a professional user to make sure they're reading even a faint positive. For self-testing, there has to be a full CE mark from a notified body. So that means performing evaluations, user evaluations, compiling a full technical dossier for that to be independently audited.
Yeah, and just again, you also need to have, I mean, to try and like quantify this, we're talking about thousands and thousands of pages of documents.
Oh yes, yeah.
Plus audits, on-site audits, potentially multiple audits, which just, what you're saying, just doesn't happen with the professional health.
No, it doesn't. And no, I mean, there is certainly a much greater awareness obviously because of mainstream media. But I mean, it's becoming really apparent now in the general marketplace that there are so many tests that are being sold by so many people. You don't know their provenance. They're all saying they're CE marked, which they are because they're self-certified. But I think as a user, you have to really understand the test that you're buying and using.
Yeah, and I think that what's I think obviously the EU have noticed this because they're actually changing the regulations. I think they're closing this professional health user piece
Yeah, it
down.
really it should be closed as well. It's dangerous, I think.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
what at what point did you realize that your technology, your proprietary technology, could be applied to COVID, either antibody or antigen? Because you were in pretty early. I mean, you called this pretty early. So we started working with you guys back in April, and you were already, you know, more than at the races on this. So when did it sort of start for you?
Yeah, I mean, BioSure, we're still a tiny company. We punch well above our weight, and I
Oh,
think
good. You should be.
well, one of the reasons is we have always collaborated with anyone who wants to collaborate with us, whether that's in development or sales or, you know, marketing. It suits our personality. It's our kind of ethos. So we already had existing relationships obviously in the UK, as we're based here, but with Mologic, who are a real kind of leading light in the R&D
awesome.
space. We got together. They love the idea of self-testing. We obviously love the idea of self-testing. They're amazing on the science side of things. So that's how that came together super quickly.
And it was using the HIV barrel device, but with a swapped out what do you call it, test strip?
The strip that's inside. So basically, instead of looking for antibodies to HIV, we were looking for antibodies to COVID-19.
Okay. And why and when did you start, why did you start with antibodies? Is that because that was what the discussion was at the time?
Yeah, I mean, there is, and it was really obviously, and so I mean, I'm sure most people will know this, but from the difference, the antigen tests are the tests that tell you if you have current infection. Antibody tests tell you if you have had it, and it's the antibodies that provide you with protection against reinfection. So
which is a big subject of debate in and of itself, which we can.
I know. But we were in, as you say, we were in super early. This all kicked off at the beginning of March. And at the time, nobody knew about how the immunity would work. And to be honest, there's still no statement on it at the moment. But while we were doing the product development, and obviously this was happening during lockdown 1, we only had access to UK samples, and we had members of the public giving us their blood, literally.
Weren't you sending bikes around collecting, you know, blood stuff?
Yes, we were, and we had big social media campaigns. We couldn't get samples from PHE or Department of Health, so but we were testing people. So some people had been hospitalized, some people had just had it at home, and we were using their blood on an ongoing basis. And after about 8 weeks, we started seeing the antibodies dropping off. And it's like, wow, is this an unintended consequence of lockdown? You know, people's immune systems are just, you know, not being fired up. But it's turned out it's the same. I mean, the antibodies are not retained.
Well, when we started doing all of the PocDoc screening in July, we had a huge number of people when we did the PocDoc COVID-19 screening. When we started in July, we had a huge number of people that had negative antibody tests, because at the time, I mean, there was only the only rapid tests that were available were antibody tests, right? There wasn't a rapid antigen test available. No. So we were doing, as you know, doing this rapid antibody test, and there was a huge number of people that had all of the COVID symptoms in March, and when we started testing in July, had no antibodies whatsoever. And it happened way too many times for it to have just been a cold or a flu. It was pretty clear that, you know, the COVID-19 was far more widespread in March due to the lower level of testing than anyone realized, but the antibodies weren't staying around for as long as people thought that they might.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, as I said, we're consumer facing. I think there's been massive frustration in people not being able to access what their kind of antibody status is. So there's far more testing being done now, but in March, nobody, there were, as you say, there were no tests. There were a handful of PCR tests being done. So people didn't know if they had COVID infection or not. And even now, I mean, our discussion has always been, if you've had an immune response, if you've produced antibodies to a COVID-19 infection, we think that that should trigger kind of, you know, a T cell memory the same
Yeah.
way that the vaccine would, but the science has still got to be played out on that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't really understand the pushback, because there was a lot of pushback on the antibody, particularly on the self-test, which maybe you can kind of go into. But I just never understood why there was a problem with people knowing if they've had the disease or not. Why was it okay for somebody to pay £200, which is what they were going for, to have a lab antibody test? Why was that okay, but it's not okay for someone just to do a simple self-test and find out themselves? I just completely didn't understand that at all. Still don't.
No, no, neither do we, to be honest. But it wasn't dissimilar to how HIV self-testing was approached. I think the regulators, certainly in the UK, the MHRA, have been very worried about the behavioural aspect of what people will do by knowing their antibody status. Would they still follow the guidelines? Would they take more risk?
Yeah.
Again, one of our arguments at the beginning with the HIV test is it was about behaviour and what would someone do if they found out they were positive and they didn't seek treatment. 99% of people plus are negative. Let's worry about the masses. Let's worry about the big numbers. And then we'll focus on the smaller numbers after. So worrying about the behavioural implications of someone having a positive antibody status for COVID and would they take more risk outweighs the 99% of people who would have a negative antibody status and actually might take the guidance really seriously and think, right, okay, I need to make sure I am protected and practice social distancing and everything else.
Yeah. And so why and so from your first foray into COVID, which was the barrel, which was the single antibody test, is that right?
Yes.
From there, then you moved on to a triple antibody. And where are you? So what happened? Was that you driving that, or was that the kind of development of the science, so to speak? And what's the difference between a triple antibody and a single antibody?
Yeah, excuse me. It's definitely the progression of the science, and as I say, this is the science behind it is a homologic development. So the triple antibody test for 3 different types of antibodies, including what I think is unique in that they detect IgA antibodies as well. So it detects your immune response as your body kind of progresses post-infection. For self-testing, you have to make sure someone can read their own result, and having a wide array of outcomes. So potentially there's 4 lines on that lateral flow strip to read in various combinations. So the IgG antibodies, which are the ones we detect, and also the antibodies that you will hopefully produce on the back of being vaccinated, means that there's a binary outcome. There's a 1 line for a negative or a 2 lines for a positive, so everybody can read it.
Okay. And do you think that there's a renewed role? Because the UK government sort of, they got behind antibody testing, but they wanted to do it. And then they've kind of moved it off, I think, into the corner for some reason. So it's not really, because they're pushing the rapid antigen test, which does different things. But do you think that with the vaccine rollout, do you think that there's a role for ongoing monitoring of antibody levels in order to assess whether people's immune response to the vaccine is working? Or do you think, what's your view around antibody tracking versus vaccine efficacy?
Well, I mean, we've always taken the approach that a triangulated kind of testing program is needed, because realistically, an antigen test that will tell you in your kind of first 7 days of infection, if you have infected, after the first 7 days, that's negated and that test is no longer useful. So even from monitoring and surveillance aspect, either at a public health level or on a personal level, antibody testing has real relevance. I mean, we deeply believe that people should have knowledge about their own health if they want it. And being able to understand what your body is doing and where you are in that journey, be it post-infection or post-vaccine, for us is a really important tool to have in the armory. Plus, from a surveillance perspective, I mean, working with the PocDoc app, as I hasten to add, no, it does give you, certainly on a personal level, that journey of what your body is doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, knowledge is always power. I hate ignorance, and I hate anything I don't understand. So the more information and knowledge I can have at a macro and a micro level is important to me, at
Yeah.
least.
No, I agree. I think that we, you know, our view is the same in our company, which is that people can make choices, but they need to have data in order to make those choices in an informed way. And in the world that we live in now, with all of the things that we have on demand delivery, we get Ubers, we do all of this stuff immediately. Why is there still such a pushback about a self-test for antibodies, or for whatever it is? Or why is it so complicated, like in our space, why is there no self-test for smartphone self-test for cardiovascular disease, or type 2 diabetes, or any of those kind of things? So we believe firmly that people can only make positive changes in their lifestyle when they have a good baseline to understand where they stand right now. And yes, people can go to the doctors if you can get an appointment, which is totally fine. But obviously now in a post-COVID world, it's becoming, I mean, there's been a lot written about how it's going to become more difficult for people to go to GPs, even if you've been diagnosed with a chronic condition like cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes. Actually going there for your ongoing monitoring, your ongoing blood tests, for that is going to become more difficult. And it will be the same way for a range of things. Like you said, the sexual health clinics are shut down because of the pandemic. Who knows whether they're going to reopen, or when they might reopen, or whether their funding might be cut. So I think, and I'm pretty sure you feel the same way, is that the need for, whether it's called self-testing or whether it's called remote testing or home testing or whatever the name is, that there has to be an acceleration in a decentralization of testing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big change, I think, from the current landscape. So at the moment, it is very centralised, but there's a clinical bottleneck, and it's not only UK based. That's global. There are not enough healthcare appointments for individuals. So from a resourcing perspective, I've never quite understood why screening negative people needs a healthcare intervention.
Right.
It's a waste of resource, and as you just said, these kind of empowered choices, the more someone is allowed to have responsibility, the more responsibility they assume. So
yeah, it's a positive cycle, but the more
absolutely.
you treat them like a child, then the more that they will sort of it's that sort of mentality. Well, the doctor didn't tell me to do it, so I'm not going to do it. Or but you end up, maybe you didn't ask the right question to the doctor, so the doctor didn't tell you what you thought you might want to know. So yeah, I completely agree.
And you feel disempowered. I think sometimes it doesn't quite belong to you. You go through a doctor, and I know that even trying to see a doctor or a dentist during this pandemic, even if you mean to, you just don't get around to it. It's too long and it's too involved, and so I do think there'll be a change.
Yeah, and I think with GPs and frontline staff, they are under so much pressure and they have so many problems to deal with. Certainly in the preventative health space, trying to take some of their time in order to do ongoing health related screenings, it seems there must be a better way that they can use their time to focus on other really critical things, and this ongoing monitoring can take place in a decentralized remote way. So that's what we're pushing forward with PocDoc. So I think that it's the same way. So on the self-testing things, I know that now you're moving on with something that could be the game changer, which is an antigen self-test.
Yes.
So why, given now that the government is rolling out rapid tests seemingly everywhere, and every poor school child will have to be swabbed 3 or 4 times a day before they can go back into the classroom and all this type of stuff. Why is a self-test, or why would a self-test antigen test be such a game changer?
Well, obviously, the whole self-administration side of things opens up that kind of, as I say, bottleneck of testing. With the self-test we're working on, again, collaborating, there are some real massive differences, though, to any other test that's in the market. So first of all, it's saliva-based.
Right.
So no nasal pharyngeal or no deep throat swabbing. It's
That's massive.
massive. It's hugely usable. But not only that, it looks for a different. So antigen tests work by looking for a type of protein. And all of the tests that I've seen, and I'll caveat this in that I haven't seen every test on the planet, are based on nucleocapsid proteins. So the technology that's being used in our antigen self-test actually looks for the spike protein. So everyone knows now what the kind of
Yeah, they put the picture
SARS-CoV-2
of
virus.
the virus on the news every day, right? It's the bobbly one with the red bits.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone knows that now. So the test technology that we're using looks for that particular spike protein. So that is only there when the virus is alive and when a person is infectious. So it is a true infectivity test.
So
It's
in theory,
phenomenal.
it means that there won't be any false positives, right? In the sense that it won't just be dead fragments of virus that happen to be in your nose. It will be if it tests positive, you definitely have the virus and the virus is live. Okay.
Yeah. And it's easy to use and gives you a result in 15 minutes. So what's not to like?
Amazing. And what's the difference between it being administered in a professional setting versus a self-test? Because I think I'm with you. So I'm not sure if you saw, but there was a big story last week in the Times where the MRHA have blocked Boris's plan to send the existing rapid antigen tests that are not approved for self-test to millions and millions and millions of people's homes and ask them to self-test. And they blocked it because previously, as we talked about, those tests have not been through the additional scrutiny, the additional regulatory pathway that would be required. So quite rightly, the MRHA blocked them, but you're going through that pathway, you're going through that pain and suffering. And so why do you think that really is valuable?
Well, with all of the tests, and this includes ours, the control line, so the line that comes up on the test for the negative result is called a procedural control line. So basically putting the buffer solution onto the strip will make that negative line appear. So the critical part is the sampling side of things, and doing a nasopharyngeal swab on yourself is pretty much impossible. So you'll have someone not taking the sample correctly, running the test, getting a clear negative result because they've not done the swabbing properly, and therefore, this behavioural piece coming back in. So with our test, which is, as I say, a saliva test, the swab works as a lollipop, so it's just on your tongue. There's an integrated colour change so that you know that the sample's there. It's all very straightforward and easy to use. But we have to build out our technical file and all of our evidence and usability.
You love it. You love all those technical files, the thousands and thousands of documents, the QMS audits, quality management system. But so for me, from what, I know that we work on this as well with you, which is great. I've always struggled slightly with this concept of, it's all well and good putting 1,000 people or 2,000 people in Wembley to watch a game, that's all fine and well and good. But if you're looking to get 90,000 people in within a number of hours, how you do that without a self-test antigen test that can be given to people prior or who could do it on their way to the game or at the home, and they upload their results through an app, potentially the PocDoc app, although other apps may be available. I don't understand how you can have probably thousands of healthcare professionals testing 90,000 people at the game, at the gate. I find that quite hard to believe. What do you think?
No, I mean, I think self-testing is probably the only solution for events, for hospitality, for aviation and travel. I mean, there are foibles in there where, obviously one of the questions that we're asked when we're going into these situations and trying to sort of help with finding a solution is, how do you know if the person has done the test themselves? So there, how we've worked with the app, there is an image recognition in there, there is ID recognition, there is a time window from when you start the test when you have to upload your results, so you can't nip out and get another one. So there's lots around it. But even if, let's just say for an event, they did think that was too big a risk to take, having someone able to self-test means that you can have thousands of people testing simultaneously and uploading their results in front of people. So, it has to be that self-testing is the way forward, but it's a big amount for the professional test users to let go of. I have to
Oh,
say.
you think that there might be some resistance from the incumbents, so to
Yeah,
speak?
I think there could be. There is certainly a strong appetite for this in the US
Right.
at the moment. They are really gung ho on self-testing, whereas I think in the UK we're using much more caution to wait and kind of see what happens. And yeah,
Okay. Well, let's talk about something other than COVID, shall we, for a
is
minute?
there something else?
I know. It feels that way, doesn't it? It's like there hasn't been anything else for a while.
I know.
So you describe yourself on Instagram as a CEO, and so
Oh,
yeah. So what's your view around the gender equality or lack thereof within the healthcare industry?
I find it phenomenal. I mean, I come from quite a male kind of industry, a male-based industry background, but I do find it incredible how few women are in this space. I regularly go to big meetings, and I'm the only woman there. So that's where the
Hmm.
CEO came in. I thought, who
Yeah,
wants to
I
be
like it. I
a
think it's
boss?
good.
It makes me laugh. And
You
at
should
some
try and
point,
trademark it.
I've trademarked it. I've done everything with it. That's my future. My
Yeah.
CEO badge is my future.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's ended up at BioSure just by chance, and the same in South Africa, and the same in Brazil, that we are virtually all female,
Yeah.
and all quite alpha female. So yeah, I just. For me, I mean, there is no discrimination that we don't employ men, but obviously,
They are. I can
obviously,
testify. I have been allowed on the premises, and
yes,
and
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah. I
allowed
don't.
free
I mean,
movement and everything. I even got a cup of tea.
yeah, very good coffee we do
Oh
here,
yeah,
but
yeah. It's coffee.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's that women, obviously, with having career breaks to have children, just don't come back into the arena, because it is hard going. I have to say, there is rarely a day that is straightforward, and thank heavens, I'm very focused on the side of things that I like, which is, kind of bringing products to market and trying to convince people that they're a good idea and to buy them. But yeah, there's very few women
What
in this
do you think?
space.
What do you think can be done about that? If anything, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of organisations and support networks to try and encourage kind of, a positive discrimination, to encourage women into this sector. But I think it's the same across engineering. And yeah, it definitely does need a more female approach to it. It is a very male driven psyche, I think, in this particular sector.
And do you think that
um
that's on the actual, on this really hardcore sciencey end, or is it more on the kind of startup digital healthcare, or is it just all across? Do you think it's the same sort of trend?
Certainly in the more established, I would say that it's more male dominated. I've worked with a few women in startups. I mean, I've never particularly thought about being female, I have to say, or being female or being a male in a particular environment. But I think in the startup world now, there are more women coming through. It's that self-belief, isn't it? I mean, we work with programs in Africa that are really like She Conquers, and every girl matters, and all of these such things, where you have to believe that you can do it, but you've got to be quite blinkered, I think, and just driven to push forwards and ignore
Right.
what's ever on the peripheries.
Okay. Wow.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, my co-founder is female, and so I know that she's felt similar things around the maleness of the industry. But it's
Yeah, you don't realise it until you're in a room or at an event, and you realise that there are really hardly any women involved in the sector at all. Yeah, it's bizarre.
you're like the queen of healthcare.
I think it's helped raise our profile somewhat.
Okay. And so you've got antibody testing is rolling out. You've got HIV testing, which is carrying on not just here but sub-Saharan Africa as well. And you've got the antigen self-test. Is there anything else you're going to add onto the plate? Like, what does the kind of the future look like the next 12 to 24 months, do you think?
Well, we're really looking intensely at the US market at the moment, because we've had so much recently. It's been driven by the market there. We've had so much interest, and I think because there are so many rubbish tests around, finding something that has a good provenance and is usable and has credibility, has created quite a demand. So yeah, looking at the US, and the US consumer market for me is
Yeah, I can imagine you find that
really,
interesting.
yeah, really interesting. So yes, we're waiting to kind of move forward in that direction at the moment. But I mean, every day is just like riding a roller coaster, really. I'm so fortunate. I've always felt blessed that I kind of landed into this, and we have a business that has real tangible social impact. We have emails or social media contacts or WhatsApp contacts every day from people either telling us about their fears or saying thank you, or it's so human.
Yeah.
What we do, we're not just kind of locked inside four walls just sending a commodity out. So I think us continuing the educational journey, and as I say, we've worked really hard on that, and we do collaborate across the board with in as many countries as we can kind of get to educating about HIV. And I think that's going to continue with COVID, because we're inundated with questions, and we're not even truly live yet with kind of the website and the comms, that are all planned and in the pipeline.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, that is very exciting. And are you going to add any more things to test, or are you going to stick with HIV and COVID, or are you looking at anything else?
No, we've got yeah, we've got
quite a lot going on.
I think this year now, thank goodness, is out of the way. We've always had sort of quite a big pipeline planned behind us, so we definitely have applications in other disease testing, and I love the sexual health arena for the impact that we can make.
The human impact, you mean the human impact?
Yeah, and I like, it's not all about me, but I like being involved in that sector, and it's a fun area to deal with. So there will be more tests coming. Goodness knows when there's going to be time to do them.
Yeah. But, are you hiring people like crazy to build the team? Or is it quite hard?
Yes, well, a bit of both, really. We've kept quite nimble internally as a team here, just so that we can manage our overheads as much as anything. But through the sort of collaboration and working with third parties, we're geared and ready to press the button any day, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this will probably be my final question, because I think we've got to wrap up in a second, in a couple of minutes. But what do you, taking a step back, looking back over the last 6 to 9 months, how do you feel like the relationship between the private enterprise and governments and regulators has been in managing the pandemic? Obviously, I know that your area is around the diagnostics, but because it's been, for me, the lines have been blurred on so many different occasions as to whether it's private enterprise that's driving innovation, is it governments driving innovation, is it who's directing what? So where do you sort of stand on that?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. I think I think it's been split into two halves, and if you were not on if you are not on the inside of the kind of Department of Health bubble, then it's really, really hard to break through. That we could have bought our COVID antibody self-test to market through the Department of Health in June, and we literally, the door was just closed in our face, despite many attempts of reopening it.
Did you get any explanation for that, or was it just you couldn't get an answer?
We got a really shoddy explanation in a tiny letter at the end of October. So I think it has closed down a lot of areas that could have been really helpful. There are companies who had really strong expertise in diagnostics, in PPE, that weren't utilised, but I think this is all public domain now, and I don't want to moan, because we are here to make a solution.
That wasn't intended to get you onto a moaning kind of track. It was more, because I feel like what's been really interesting, I think in a really good way, about the pandemic is, from a health tech perspective, is that so much resource has been thrown at such a narrow range of problems.
Yeah.
So much. But then the question is whether or not that resource is being directed by people who really are trying to foster the innovation and see where the innovation ends up, or whether there's a kind of a pre-existing sort of motive or agenda there as well. So yeah, I just thought I would try and get your
I'm going to say a little bit tight-lipped, but yes, let's see how it comes over the next few months.
On another random question, if there was the same amount of resources thrown at the COVID vaccine as there was, for example, with an HIV vaccine, do you think, with your expertise in that area, do you think that that would be something where we could get to, or is that still quite a long way off?
Well, there's been years and years of funding and resource thrown at HIV vaccination and some huge programs. I mean, thank goodness there is PrEP. So that's the prophylactic that you can take before. So we've made a big step forward. We should have talked about HIV on the global arena. Forgot I want to throw that in. Next time, you'll have to have me back.
Come on, you can't do that. I think we've got, go on, a little, what do you mean?
Yeah, no, just the impact that COVID's had on the HIV landscape and how rates are going back up and treatments aren't available and tests aren't being rolled out. But that will be a conversation for 21.
You can come back another time and talk to us about that. Sure.
Yeah, no, I would really love to. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the next 6 months pan out. I think in this landscape. Slightly survival of the fittest. So.
Yeah, let's just keep
on keeping on. Each day. Yeah. We do say here, as the door closes, we'll climb through a window. So it's not behaviour. It's not behaviour we're changing. Yeah, It's just exhausting. That's all. Okay. But thank goodness 2020 is over.
Yeah, roll on 2021 for sure.
Yeah,
it's going to be an exciting year for everyone.
I think so, and it has to be hopefully, please God, a more straightforward year than this year.
Good. Well, look, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show and being my first guest. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you and get the full story about BioSure and how you shook up the world of HIV and are now shaking up the world of COVID. And I really, really, really hope that you can bring all of these amazing COVID antigen self-tests to market.
Thank you very much. I'm just thrilled you've chosen me. So thank you, Steve.
And I wish you all the best. Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. To the extent that we all can have a Christmas. Merry Christmas. Do you like my lights? The radio listening, but I've got whole lights around my setup here.
Very nice. Very festive. Very festive. Yeah. Well, have a lovely Christmas and best wishes to everyone who's listening. And take care and stay safe, I guess.
Good. Well, look, thanks. And just before we go, I just want to say that my next show is a week today, so it's Tuesday at 1 p.m. and we'll be talking to Peter Cowley, who is one of the most prolific angel and early stage investors and entrepreneurs in the UK. He's head of the Cambridge Angels, head of a whole bunch of other angel networks, and has made a huge number of investments in the health tech space. And he will be talking to us about all of his experience in health tech, and then we'll be very excited to talk to him. Anyway, happy Christmas, everyone.